When you start a film, you never set out with the intention of doing the work to garner recognition at a higher level than just the beautiful craft that you've tried to put into the film. But in the case of Lord of the Rings, of course, it has a legacy well and beyond just the process of making film.
I think as we got into the first year, it all dawned on us quite rapidly. I thought it was going to take a lot longer, things were going to be moving a little bit slower, it was a lot bigger than we first anticipated.
There's no doubt that when we started these 3 films, Tanya and myself included, were fairly green at what we were attempting to do. It's a great tribute to Peter and New Line that they entrusted in us the level of confidence, but it required a huge amount of learning. We'd never made armies of soldiers, we'd never produced hundreds if not thousands of weapons, designing creatures and making prosthetics in mass numbers. But of course, all of it is relative to the group that you gather around you.
These guys just went, beyond the pale in terms of really delivering a high level of artistry to Pete, as well as a high level of enthusiasm and love for the project. Everything was designed down to the very most minutest of details. I mean, belt buckles and arrowheads and, you name it.
It's one of the real delights of working with Peter as a director is that he will take you creatively places you could never bring yourself to risk going. We appreciated that through the length of the 3 films there would be significant battles, there would be a huge amassing of these troops, this melee of action. And knowing that, we were very conscious that each culture would stand alone, be represented through their particular silhouette. We wanted the journey of that particular culture to have a plausible history. Gondor was an interesting culture to develop because Gondor was once a mighty nation. It ranged across huge lands, but that has long passed and now it's a kingless state.
By the Third Age, they've fallen from grace and they're not the power that they once were.
Their armour and their weapons have become more representative of a ceremonial process as opposed to just strict warfaring as, say, we see in the Rohan.
So I know personally when I was thinking about how you can tell that story in the armour, I was looking at Romantic era stuff for shapes and suggestions that the culture is looking back rather than looking forward.
This is the basic grunt of the Gondor. They carry quite an elaborate full-plate suit of armour. The motif on the chest is the white tree of Gondor, but now it represents the realm in decline because the state is now ruled by a steward instead of a king. The tree leaves are falling from the tree of Gondor.
I remember how difficult it was, how long we spent trying to make the greaves the proper shape so that basically anyone could wear them, and that they still have that elegance of shape that you have to achieve when you're making X number of suits for X number of extras who are all slightly different in size. It's very hard because you cannot indulge in the finer elements that make armor look real. It has to fit. It's like wearing a 3-piece suit, but it's made of iron. So if it's not quite right, then, you can't sort of have the tailor let it out a bit.
You just think back to those guys who actually did wear all of that sort of stuff and you just think, God, who invented it? Good luck to them. Do you have Michelin here? Does that translate? The Michelin Man? The man with like, yeah, that's sort of the feel of it. Or the Stay Puft Monster. I felt like the Stay Puft Monster on top of a horse.
Faramir carries a similar armour, the multi-laned leg coverings, built-in hard coat so that the actor can comfortably wear it. His helmet is made in 2 pieces so that it will flip up when necessary. He carries a very simple sword at his side.
Gondorian armor was an interesting nut to crack because this is a very ancient, very powerful, very arrogant maritime nation. So there should be some reference to the sea in all this.
Tolkien describes them as having seagulls' wings on their helmets.
There's no better example than this. This is a Gondorian helmet from the Battle of Golgoroth way back at the beginning of film 1. You can see how the helmet has a feeling of antiquity because the wing blades are still removed as separate components in the overall helm. But the progression of this culture over the next 1,000 years take us to this. The helmet has become a single bowl, hand-beaten out of plate steel. The seabird's wings now are embossed out from the inside surface, making for a more efficient piece of armour. Now, going to the total extreme is the Court of the Fountain Guard. They carry these large seabird wing motif up the side of their helmet, very much the crest of their position.
Oh, they're sort of a remnant left over from when the kings ruled Gondor. They don't answer to the steward, and they protect the courtyard and the White Tree.
Aren't those winged helmets such an annoying idea? I mean, it's one of the few things, I think, in Middle-earth that is kind of at odds with this overall absolutely beautiful aesthetic.
We were trying to figure out ways to do it and make it work and make it look ancient and beautiful and graceful, but we couldn't quite nail it.
It's a little bit tricky because you immediately think of Vikings. You shouldn't even be thinking of Vikings because Vikings never had wings on their helmets.
That would have been heartbreaking to see all these Gondorians hopping about in Thor helmets, wouldn't it, with 2 silly wings nailed to the sides of their heads. That would have been awful.
So it was trying to come up with a more formal way of giving these helmets wings.
Ellen did this beautiful drawing where the feathers were sticking out ridiculously on the side of the head, and yet it worked and it looked great, so fantastic, and it looked real somehow.
I particularly like these helmets. They're as crazy as our own culture's created the ceremony that's so tied in with war.
And then you've got the Citadel Guard, which is the level in the army that Pippin joins.
These are the guys that actually always stay inside the city and fight within the city walls defending it.
This is Pippin's scabbard and utility belt. The concept being the outside wall of Minas Tirith, the 7 levels of the great city, the court of the kings, and the penetrating rock that makes up the bow that creates the city of Minas Tirith.
Then we come to the helmet. Not my favourite. Sorry, people of Weta.
The initial rendering of Billy's helmet was hilarious because it was the Gondorian helmet with the silver kind of nipple at the top, but then it had black feathers on either side.
Completely out like that. And I honestly thought I was on some sort of candid camera.
The helmet was like this big. It looked like, you know, like something that Cher might wear to the Academy Awards.
But there was another helmet, and even Ian didn't like it because when he's holding on to the front of his horse, he's got this helmet up to about here, this pointed helmet. Get out.
Down to the lower level, quick! Level up, man!
So, you'll notice in the movie, I ripped that helmet off quite a lot, you know, because it's truthful for the scene.
Pete likes armor, and I remember that for the Black Gate, he wanted me to be all armored up for that, and I said, you know, because of the way he's set up as a ranger and that transition, it wouldn't seem right to suddenly be all like a tank. You know what I mean? It just didn't feel right. And the other thing is, I knew I was gonna have to be running around on the ground and fighting people and stuff, and I said, it's much better and it's more in keeping with Aragorn's style to go helmetless and no gloves.
We did talk about a heavy armor, you know, for the Black Gates, but it just doesn't fit who Aragorn is in the films.
It was quite heated for a little while there about which way to go.
What was wanted was a look for him to say, I'm not the king yet, but I'm stepping up to lead this army, and I really have cast off the last remnants of who I was.
The reconciliation of that was to go to a leather coat that had the Tree of Gondor embroidered on it. Once again, like Faramir, we incorporated the White Tree of Gondor, but in this instance, it was embroidered, and this was added a little extra difficulty to it.
But for the coronation, it had to be something special.
Peter really wanted Viggo to be in armour, so the final scene was where we brought back the armour for the coronation.
The armor I'm wearing is the armor of my forefathers. Old armor that I think you see in the prologue.
We used as much of Elendil's armour as we possibly could. The idea that this armour had been rescued from the battlefield, and in the same way that the Royal Guard have maintained their vigil protecting the tree, somewhere resting in state is the trappings of the royal family.
Quite elaborate, but quite ceremonial, carrying the stars of Gondor, the bird's wings, the carefully engraved motifs. Once again, all originally made out of plate steel.
I think there was a certain maturity in the way the design team worked, and I thought the variety of designs that were done for the Gondorian armor was very effective. I thought it was enchanting in a number of ways.
A very beautiful suit of armour to look at. It's got lovely lines and, you know, a lot of work went into designing that particular style.
The Haradrim went through a few different design phases. We even locked in on them and then had it changed on us.
All that Tolkien says is flashes of golden red. Flash of golden red as they trample past. And we know they're from the south, which is hotter. So I went, oh, golden red, cool. Everything else is kind of monochromatic blacks and greys and browns. Good chance to get some good rich colours in. So I developed ways of making fake tiger skins, the whole skins, and leopard skins, and lion skins, and zebra skins. And started collecting feathers to be dyed. And Philippa Boynes, the writer, came down and went, hang on, you can't make them look African. That would just be rude. Yet another race of bad guys, you know, with dark skin.
We didn't want to draw too heavily from any one particular culture, for obvious reasons. This is Middle-earth, and also you don't want to insult anybody. These are bad guys after all.
So I did some more research and thought, okay, the only races that I can pull on are a small island called Kiribati, who are so small that I don't think I'm insulting them to plagiarise the way they make their armour, which is they weave all their armour out of wicker. And then I added that to the Aztecs, who have no metal technology, but they have massive amounts of gold and turquoise. And to that I've added ivory because, let's face it, they've got giant elephants.
So what we ended up with the Haradrim was a culture that I think is far more unique and far less recognisable.
These wicker-made suits of armour, reinforced with shaped bamboo, elements of the Aztec culture being woven into it through semi-precious stones, selective pieces of gold plating.
We also gave them animal fetishes. Like they bring the power of the beast onto themselves by adorning themselves in beast tokens.
Their technology is very much one from fighting from the back of a large creature, as say the way that real elephants are used in our world. They mostly use spears and bows, bows that are built out of long antlers, very strong poundage on the bows to fire short little bamboo arrows from these bamboo quivers down into the enemy. So once again, the gold motif with little tiny Aztec illustrations of characters in battle running around the bottom of them.
Also, you see some Haradrim who are driving the elephants, and we thought we'd have a bit of fun with these guys. So we went to town with them with body painting, scarification, tattooing.
The joy of something like this is that you actually invent this whole scenario of how they make their stuff. You know, you don't just go, oh, they're Harad, there you go. The way to make them special and fantastic is to actually come up with an entire culture to back up any questions about them.
In the case of the orcs, it was an interesting journey with these characters because in film 1 and film 2 we played them as much more of a sort of a rabble, this sort of schoolyard bully, the rats of the battlefield. They have clad themselves in armour that they've scrounged and picked up off the corpses of their enemies and patched these together with bits of fabric and finery, but it's all rotted away and dirtied down.
The orcs were one of the big problems of Return of the King, partly because we created a reasonably formidable force of opposition for the Helm's Deep sequence. And the Uruk-hai, by their nature, were much tougher and stronger and more brutal, and they worked quite well. And the very first cut that we ever saw of Return of the King, it was one of the weakest things in the movie with the orcs.
I just think the ape-like thing looks just, I just don't like the look of it. It looks just a little... It looks a little like people are trying too hard to look like apes.
They'd unfortunately been trained, the extras and stunt people have been trained to walk in this bow-legged monkey walk. which I called the full diaper walk because it looked like, but they just looked like kids with full diapers basically, the way that they were trotting around, and they were anything but scary.
So he came to us and said, look, I realise now that for the final battles, the orcs now need to take on a more intimidating and focused perspective. In fact, we even need characters within the armies of the orcs that become the antagonists that I can focus on and separate out from the masses.
The brief on the new orcs was kind of uber orcs. These were actually Sauron's orcs.
It was really the idea of they're not a new breed, they're not Uruk-hai, but they are the best orcs. And they've lived and been trained in Mordor as an army.
So we went back to the drawing board, and basically what we did is we had literally hundreds and hundreds of photos and drawings of all of the orc makeups that we did, and he wanted to see them all. So what we did is we got them all, stuck them on this huge, huge board, and we put numbers by them all.
And you could just go and go, oh, I'll have a bit of that, and a bit of that, and that's really cool, and that's not physically possible, so... But maybe if we change that a bit, and you could actually cobble together other people's cool ideas.
That's our favourite one there. The orcs are all going to have individualised helmets and armour, and their faces are all different.
He'd check each ones that he really, really liked, and then from there, he says, yep, this is what I don't want. He says, I don't want any witchy-poo noses. So witchy-poo noses was the thing.
I guess it was sort of a long, extended nose. So we sort of went for something a bit more skeletal on the new breed of Mordor orcs.
Their faces, they were supposed to be just really, really hard. They were supposed to feel a little more lived in and kind of diseased. I mean, they are a lot stronger, but they've just been corrupted by this malice for so long. They have just little bits of rot and stuff all over them.
Their new looks, we also gave them an upgrade with armor, armor design as well. So the guys at the workshop designed all this new, really kind of cool armor.
So the whole idea was plate steel, but it's all the curves have been sharpened and filed, so they're all like shears and secateurs, and if you get near to this armour, it'll be enough to lose fingers.
Orcs are like a box of chocolates. You don't know what you got until you open one.
I think it helped to actually make them into a more credible and fearsome fighting force.
Another big failing with the orcs was that they had no commander. We had Sauron in his tower and we had the Witch King, but we had nobody on the battlefield sort of telling the orcs what to do. And so we created a character who was only referenced by name once or twice in the book, and that's the character of Gothmog, played by Lawrence McCaury.
First question was, what is a Gothmog? What is it? Oh, no one's told you yet? Oh, no. He's actually an orc. I want an orc. In the first movie, I played an Uruk-hai. They stand tall. Orcs were the little ones. I mean, how am I going to play an orc when I'm 6'4"?
We picked Lawrence because he had played Lurtz in the Fellowship of the Ring, and he'd done such a great job about projecting all this energy and aggression through this thick rubber prosthetics that he had to wear. That we couldn't think of anybody better, and we thought, well, the great thing with prosthetics is you can design a completely different face and still stick it on the same guy, and you're never going to recognize him.
Bill Hunt beautifully sculpted Gothmog.
I put just a spot of rot on the side of his nose, in addition to some of the callous stuff that we were doing on some of the others. And I was afraid that the rot was going to be a bit much.
I looked at that and I thought, God, we should use this, but go way, way beyond this. In fact, we should do a John Merrick.
He basically says, a bit more like the Elephant Man. It's like, what? So like take it in, a bit more in here, and he grabs like a big chunk of plastic and he starts packing it on. It's like, okay.
We always like to think these days that we can preempt Pete's excesses to a certain degree. But sure enough, when Pete comes in for his design meetings, he's there with the big chunks of plasticine and mushing it on and pushing it around with a heat gun and squashing it.
He goes off to a meeting with Richard just after that. And like 10 minutes later, I'd take an entire block of plasticine and just crumpled up into balls and just packed it onto the side of this thing. It's like, okay, I want to get to a point where he's going to say, all right, that's too far, now pull it back. And next time he saw it, he said, yeah, that's great. So, okay, well, we'll put texture over the top and call it done.
You get an early morning call, and you're still tired from, waking up so early, and then you sort of like fall asleep, like that.
He'd sleep in the chair, and he'd have hours of makeup done.
If you're going to be... He always seemed to be suffering from lack of sleep because he had to arrive on set at 4 in the morning and then sit inside all this latex. I've got this great photo of him sound asleep in a wheelbarrow.
you know, all hanging over the edges of this wheelbarrow off, tucked in behind a shed. And when it was time for him to do his thing, we'd either wake him up or drag him out of the breakfast tent or wherever he'd wandered off to.
Stand here, Lawrence. Wait, just down here. That way? Yeah, which way?
And send him off, and you wouldn't undress him again until the end of the day.
That's right. He's fantastic. He looks really great.
In the film, he comes riding in on his ward. Just looks like a John Wayne kind of character. Comes riding in on his horse. He's just turned out to be a really cool character, and he's featured in the film quite a bit.
What of the wizard? I will break him.
Another decision we made was to redesign the Witch King, which when I say redesign the Witch King was really his helmet.
John Howe was a big influence on the original helmet design. I did a lot of drawings and sculptures based off the helmets you see in his paintings, which are this very tall bucket, sort of round helmets with the crown of spikes on the top.
But was just too similar to, just looked a little bit too similar to Sauron.
Even people who had worked on the films who hadn't read the book, when they saw footage, thought, does Sauron show up at the battle, doesn't he?
You fool. No man can kill me. Die now.
I think at the end of the day, it was too removed from the Black Riders we'd seen in film 1.
What we came to realise was that in some way we needed to pay design homage back to the wraiths on the horses. So Warren Mahi threw his great sensibilities into it.
I remember Pete saying that he wanted to have a big tall spike that got bigger and bigger and bigger. And the original designs had small spikes around the outside that got bigger as well. And he wanted the whole face to feel quite long and, in a sense, resemble the Black Riders. He wanted you to think that underneath that helmet was the hood as well.
You take out eyes.
Start the first move, but obviously don't swing it. We'll just cut it. I like the spikes. The spikes somehow evoke the crown of thorns. I don't know quite what that means, but it kind of he has this ring of spikes, and he just I think the helmet design is really cool actually, and I'm glad that we did it. And it gives him his own specific character and personality. In addition to the helmet, we redesigned his mace.
We had made a mace for the Witch King.
And I looked at the first one that they built and I just said, it's okay, but we need to make it bigger.
Okay, so we made it bigger. And Pete came back and said, no, I need it bigger again. So we made it bigger. And everybody's going, oh my God, this thing's getting huge. It's totally impractical now.
You need a big wrist.
Well, it went from impractical to ridiculous. I mean, this thing was huge.
And I'm like, hey guys, I'm embarrassed to take this on set. I'm going to get laughed off set. This is so ridiculously large.
Oh, Andrew?
Yeah. And so I sort of hid it under my jacket as I walked through all the armour techs onto set so I didn't get a ribbing. And I went up to Pete and I said, look, Pete, this is what we've come up with for the Witch King. Pete gets it. He's flaying it like this. He gets one swing, and then the handle catches in his lapel, and the momentum, he's going around. It's so funny, and it nearly flips him over, and it hits the ground, and it's caught in his jacket. And it's like, you don't think the head's just a little bit too excessive, do you? And he goes, well, I was actually thinking it's about 50% too small, and I'm like, oh no, please.
And it ended up being this enormous cast iron spiked thing.
Some people call it a mace, some people call it a morning star. Oh God. Either way, I ended up calling it damned heavy, because it was damned heavy.
It ended up being so large that you actually couldn't pick it up.
Right. And so I'm lying on my back in the scene, and I'm lifting it up into camera shot for him.
Once again, Faith and Pete, when you finally see it in the movie, it is ludicrously large, but it works because it's ludicrously large. I mean, you see that thing, and you see the look on Eowyn's face when she sees it. She's terrified.
I don't think it jars anyone out of the moment. I don't think it stops people to think, God, that's a little daft. I think they just accept it as a piece of Peter Jackson's storytelling.
The Mouth of Sauron was a difficult character because you don't quite know what he is. Is he a human being? Is he an orc? I mean, in the book it seems like he's some sort of human in service of Sauron, like a quisling, like a traitor, a treacherous sort of turncoat.
The rider was robed all in black, and black was his lofty helm. Yet this was no ring-wraith, but a living man. The lieutenant of the Tower of Barad-dûr he was, and his name is remembered in no tale, for he himself had forgotten it, and he said, "I am the Mouth of Sauron."
Richard's guys at Weta designed an interesting idea for a helmet, which was a helmet that didn't really have eyes or eye holes.
Fantastic design by Warren. It's kind of half warrior, half priest, quite disturbing.
I'd been there long enough at Weta, and I mean this in the best possible way, for Richard Taylor to pigeonhole me into evil guys. I mean, that's fine. I mean, I love that. I love that. That's cool. So we talked a lot about the fact of, is he just an envoy for Sauron? Is he like a diplomat? Or is there some type of feed which is directly Sauron speaking? It was actually Ben Whitten who said, oh, well, what if he's actually blind? And so that's how the helmet was brought about. You know, we totally covered up his eyes.
Now, that's not talked about in the book. There's no mention of whether his eyes are covered or not. But yet, I think it's really cool. I mean, when I saw it, I thought, oh yeah, why not? That's a really nice idea.
And then this evil mouth, the idea that every time he spoke, his language was so evil that it would crack the lips or the skin of his face.
Mike Asquith sculpted this appliance, and this appliance was just a very, very subtle gelatin appliance that had all these splits in the makeup.
We actually tried to do it in such a way that the splits would actually open, and as he articulated, the splits would open and close.
We knew they were going to do it a little bit, but we didn't realize it was going to be that much. And it was just like, it was pretty creepy and pretty gross.
When Pete told us who he had cast for the Mouth of Sauron, we were really buzzed because we really enjoyed Bruce Spencer's character out in Mad Max, the gyrocopter pilot, this nutty guy.
And so we did this makeup on Bruce, and I remember Bruce saying, he says, oh, what did I ever do to Peter? I said, you're not going to see anything of me in this. And all you saw was just this little mouth with these dentures going, what did I ever do to Peter?
I've never been so submerged in costume, makeup and masks, etc., as I have been in this. I've got a cold sore that's obviously gone wrong. I haven't been taking my antibiotics.
He had a hell of a time because we were shooting at Ruapehu and his horse was misbehaving and he was blind. I mean, he couldn't really see anything.
My masters, Sauron the Great, bid thee welcome.
We said, well, you're going to have to ride the horse up and stop it on this mark on the ground. And he couldn't see the mark and he was totally blind.
I think these days, to be a fully fledged actor, you've got to learn to ride.
And I never really thought much about the Mouth of Sauron again for years, because we were working on the other movies, and then we got the footage out and we started cutting it together, and I kind of thought that people would be disappointed by it.
My masters, Sauron the Great, bid thee welcome.
And I somehow thought that, you know, the prosthetics look fine and the design is fine, but surely there must be something else we can do to make this character a bit more kind of memorable.
Pete decided that he just, he wanted something a little bit different looking. He just wanted to make him look a bit more scarier.
I then experimented with the idea of taking the mouth, which is obviously horizontal, and just simply cutting it out of the image and turning it sideways so it becomes a vertical mouth. You know, like it's there and it's sort of talking. And I thought that would be interesting. I was just trying to think of something that would make him unique and memorable. And so they did a test for me of the vertical mouth.
My masters, Sauron the Great.
Some of the tests looked really weird and just really creepy.
But again, it was going to take quite a lot of time.
Pete decided, no, let's not do that. Let's just keep what we had. But basically what Weta Digital did is that they kept our original makeup, but they enlarged it by about 200%, I think it was.
My master, Sauron the Great, bids thee welcome.
And it's really weird. I mean, I was really pleased with the way that the effect worked because it gives you this uneasy sense that something's weird. I like it. It's one of those slightly subtle but sort of disturbing effects.
The Army of the Dead was something that we got very excited about early on. I mean, all makeup effects guys want to do zombies at some point in time, and, you know, hey, we're like everyone else, and we were quite keen to do some zombies.
The Army of the Dead date from the same period as, you know, the Battle of the Last Alliance, but where exactly they come from in Middle-earth, I'm not quite sure. I think we wanted them to feel more ancient and a little bit more exotic.
Warren Mahi hit upon some great ideas for them, and his armour designs became really the basis for what we see in the Army of the Dead.
A lot of the breastplates were quite ribcage-like, and a lot of the armour was splinting down the arms of metal, so it sort of mimicked the corpse or the skeleton that was underneath it.
Some of the icons that we brought in for the Army of the Dead was a lot of parallel vertical lines and a lot of circles.
For one of the armies itself, I actually thought I liked their armour, one of the best, I guess, because it looked a little bit more, I suppose, from a highly sophisticated race of people that had disappeared off Middle-earth.
But nothing had been done on the actual King of the Dead himself. And Peter wanted him to obviously stand out from the crowd a little bit.
We came up with this idea that we would have the King of the Dead filmed in prosthetics, where he would look a little bit rotten. You know, you'd still see his nose and his skin and his lips and everything else. And we would morph between that and a digital version of him, which was much more skull-like. It was his sort of underskull and some sort of sinew and things.
There would be a very elegant transition from the actor and the prosthetics to this underlying decrepit skull underneath that would have to be all CG and animated and tracked to the actual actor.
And then the compositor was blending backwards and forwards between what we called the stage 1 and the stage 2. Stage 1 being the green screen element, and the stage 2 being this digital skull with skin.
Depending on his emotions, we based it on his mood. So if he was trying to be angry and make a point or be threatening, the skull would sort of thrust forward into prominence. And then if he was more settled and just sort of being more relaxed, you would see more of his rotten kind of skin.
Now, of course, we were designing all this, and then someone sort of came into the room and said, "Hey, you know this Army of the Dead stuff, the King of the Dead stuff?" I went, "Yeah." And Randy, she said, "Have you seen the trailer for Pirates of the Caribbean?" I went, "No." I said, "You should take a look at it." We're like, oh.
They did something the same kind of thing. It's like, oh, damn, they already did something like that.
Just when I thought we had a good idea, somebody else has gone and done something similar to that.
Their stuff was cool. I mean, it's beautiful and it's different. I think that's the good thing, is our stuff that we've done is different. And both were very beautiful. It's a cool look. It's good to see some zombies in a movie again.
That line was broken. It has been remade.
I think potentially what's happening is that the head is almost overweighted the body now, so it becomes top heavy, therefore not giving the might to the upper body.
Remember the first day I was here, Richard Taylor saying to me that it has to be a mix of an alternative reality, that you can believe things actually did happen. I think that helped us a lot with how we came to the designs or the ideas that we did. We'd imagine that it could belong in the world that we live in now, especially the creatures.
Great horns she had, and behind her short, stalk-like neck was a huge swollen body, a vast bloated bag swaying and sagging between her legs. Its great bulk was black, blotched with livid marks, but the belly underneath was pale and luminous and gave forth a stench.
It's said that Tolkien, in his very early life, when he was in South Africa, was actually badly frightened by a tarantula spider. And it's possible that this stayed in his mind forever, because dangerous spiders are very much part of his whole run of stories.
Scary spiders are interesting because I guess different people have different concepts of what they should look like. I mean, I'm genuinely scared of spiders, and so, you know, everything that frightens me about spiders is kind of natural. It's not exaggerated, and it's not sort of a science fiction-y kind of stylization. It's just real spiders doing what they do normally. And I felt that Shelob shouldn't really be much more than that, other than the fact that she's big.
Shelob was a huge group effort, being a character that had to be completely convincing.
Guts of it is, we've got to always remember that a lot of the time we've got to appreciate Shelob from a Hobbit-type perspective.
Peter wanted a lot of work done on it, a lot of research done on it, a lot of reference provided to get it just right. It had to be like Gollum. Gollum had to be able to act and emote. Shelob had to be able to really scare people. And so we started with real spiders.
We sort of looked at things like tarantulas and hunting spiders.
Pete's an arachnophobe, so Shelob became the spiders he hates the most.
One spider in particular that used to terrorize me, or still does, but particularly when I was a kid, I used to go under my parents' house and dig in the ground under in the basement, and I used to make little roads for my corgi toys. and was when I was 5 or 6 years old. And there's a spider that lives in those sorts of basements in New Zealand called a tunnel web, and it like lives in little holes, and it loves rotten wood, and it has these very thick webs. And sometimes you dig it around and you come across a nest of one. And I remember under my parents' house, it used just to terrify me. I always loved playing there, but I was terrified of coming across the tunnel webs.
And he wanted Shelob to resemble this spider. And Christian, who's also not too happy with spiders, actually went out and found one in the garden.
And brought it in to show it to Peter, and, you know, he sort of wouldn't let me get closer than 5 feet with it. But this thing was like 4 times bigger than I was expecting to be when I sort of managed to hook it out of the wall. It's like, oh, crikey.
So for a while, there was this live tunnel web at Weta, which was forming the part of the design process of Shelob.
The body had this sort of soft, sponge-like feel to it. So some of those elements were brought into the Shelob design.
But her face was something that was slightly unattainable. We had designed some faces for Shelob, but they really weren't working for Pete.
She had a far more spider-like face, originally.
That was tough, because once you start enlarging a sort of a microscopic spider face, they tend to not look quite that scary.
Shelob went through design derivation after design change and looking for something that was really intimate in Peter's mind, something really special that he could see that we hadn't yet found. And he pushed us and he pushed us.
Peter wanted something ever so slightly human about it, that you could look at the spider and see it was looking straight back at you.
I wanted to somehow capture the feeling of Shelob being sort of ancient and evil and very sick, sort of psychologically sick. So I wanted her face to look like she'd been struck with a sort of a paralysis and had fungus growths on her head and all this sort of stuff.
The general brief was just make her nasty. She's a sick, diseased demon spider. Make her a lot more malignant and growth-ridden, almost as though you can smell her.
And so a lot of sculptures had been done to the point that Pete and Fran had, just like, okay, there's just so many here. How do we pick one? And apparently Pete and Fran's children picked the one. It was the one that they thought was the grossest looking. And that became the Shelob design, which, hey, what better way to choose?
I think it really comes together in that really low shot where we crane right down below Frodo and Shelob is right over his head, getting closer and closer and closer.
Everything that I hate about spiders, I really wanted to get into that Shelob scene. It was actually a very personal scene for me and a lot of fun. At the beginning of 2003, Alan Lee had a suggestion for us, which was to create a new creature.
It occurred to me that we really only have one new creature in the Return of the King, and that's Shelob. And Tolkien had mentioned that his siege engines and machines of war were dragged across the Pelennor fields by great beasts.
Grond they named it, in memory of the hammer of the underworld of old. Great beasts drew it, orcs surrounded it, and behind walked mountain trolls to wield it.
So we don't know what these great beasts are, and Tolkien never gave us any more detail.
So there was an opening there. There was an excuse to actually introduce one of these characters. So I did a drawing in the sketchbook, which I quite liked, and showed to Peter.
And Peter, being such a visual person, I think seeing that went, oh, well, that's great, we've got to do that.
And then I had to sort of show it to everyone at Weta Digital in a meeting. And there was a little bit of surprise there, the fact that I'd already shown it to Peter.
That was sprung on Digi at the 11th hour, and there was some pretty shocked faces, knowing it was PJ approved and that it had to be done.
Alan shows up one day with this whole new creature. I mean, it's like, yeah, it looks really cool, Alan, but we don't have any time to do any of this anymore.
And we were like, oh my God, here's a whole another creature this late in the day.
He said, well, you got to have the great beast, again, being a true Tolkienite. And he has a way of sort of telling you, it's like, okay, all right, again, it's partly, I don't want to fight anymore about any of this. It's like, whatever, pile up high enough, put it on the top.
So the idea of making the great beasts was something that was put into everybody's mind at the beginning of the year, and Richard Taylor and his team worked with Alan on designing what this creature might look like.
Interestingly enough, when Jamie Bestwarrick came to actually sculpting the maquette for it so that Weta Digital could scan it and animate the creature, he used a lot of prehistoric reference, and there is actually a creature that bears a striking resemblance to the great beast that did actually exist.
A large mammal known as brontops, which worked out quite well because it was almost proportionately the same, right down to the beginnings of what could have been a horn on the front of the head. It's great working off Alan's design because it was so anatomically correct. It's always a joy to work from because it's incredibly accurate.
Then that was scanned, and it didn't take too long really to put that into effect and get the creature working.
It's a nice little treat, really. It just comes out of nowhere and there it is and it's gone again. The great beasts. We always wondered what they looked like and now we know.
Peter came up with this amazing concept of this mama kill charge, and it's just so awe-inspiring, and that was great. But then he was like, you know what, we need to have like a physical dead mama kill, you know, in some of these scenes.
You know, all this stuff sort of happens digitally. You know, we obviously don't have giant mama kills.
So Pete came and asked if we could possibly build a life-size dead mama kill for the Battle of Pelennor as a backdrop for some of the shots.
I don't know why, but Richard put his hand up and said, yep, we'll do that one. That sounds challenging.
This sounded cool, and a hell of a cool opportunity that wasn't to be passed up.
And of course, we only had something like 3-4 weeks at the max to do this, and it was a huge, huge sculpture.
I always get a kick out of, you know, how these things unfold. You know, a quick sentence out of Peter like, yeah, we need a dead mama kill for the shot, means a hell of a lot. It's quite a big undertaking.
So I had Jason pour me up a plasticine replica out of this maquette. It stood about this big. And before the plasticine fully cooled, I got him to very carefully take it out of the silicon. And then I took this soft, perfectly sculpted plasticine mamakill, raised it above my head and slammed it down on the lino. And to everyone sort of, oh, you know, what the hell are you doing? But in the process, it squashed onto its side and almost perfectly melded into the correct position of a massive creature that had fallen over.
Before we knew it, there was this giant mamakill lying dead in our studio.
A whole team of sculptors attacked it with chainsaws, grinders, and began to surface it down and put the detail in, sculpting the eyes, the toenails, the tusks.
And all you could see was poly everywhere. And, you know, and for me, I used to think, oh no, how are we going to get rid of all this waste? I mean, polystyrene's the hardest thing to throw away because it takes up so much space in your rubbish truck.
One day I had it all assembled, just sort of pushed all the pieces together. Wow! It was big.
That thing was so cool. It was enormous. If you stood next to one of the feet, the height of a man was only the, you know, the width of this thing's soul.
Probably the biggest problem we faced with that particular miniature, and God, can you call it a miniature, was actually moving it.
Well, luckily the girl falls apart. She comes in bits.
We sliced it up, put it onto trucks. I think it took 12 trucks.
I think it was 11 articulated trucks.
I think somebody said 18 flat deck trucks.
It was a lot of house removal trucks.
So that all went through Wellington in the middle of the day. The public quite liked seeing elephant bits sailing through the city.
John Harding supervised these huge cranes that lifted the different pieces and rebuilt this elephant on location.
This is the mamakill, or oliphant, as legend calls them. And this is how big they are. It was said we couldn't do it. So Richard, being who Richard is, said, yes, of course we can do it. We can do anything.
I think it took me a week the first time to put it all together and get all the arrows. There's 600 arrows embedded in the side, and there's 5 spears and an awful lot of blood coming out of an awful lot of wounds.
This is the largest single prop in the world to be built for a film.
When we turned up on set, and I turned to Pete, and I, as I try and always do, and said, you know, are you happy with it? He sort of gave me a look as if to say, I think it could have been a lot bigger. And in Mr. Jackson fashion, I think he would have liked it to be a little bit bigger, as would we all. But ultimately, there are compromises occasionally to make sure you deliver on the dates. And you can get it through the door, of course, and under the trolley lines. As they finished their filming on the location, Weta Workshop and Weta Digital collaborated, and we threw a huge picnic.
All the families came, so the kids were all running around and climbing up on top of it.
Tanya, I want to thank you all obviously for coming out here. It's a very special occasion. This is obviously the most people that have ever worked at Weta at the moment, which is quite an incredible thing. And obviously all the families that have joined us as well.
And we ended up having our crew photographs sitting on top of the Mamakill.
It was unbelievable, actually. It was kind of bizarre. We all went out for a picnic and it was there in the field, dead.
It was a good family atmosphere. We had the barbie going and a few tinnies.
I'm wearing a stupid hat waving and I'm standing on the Mumakill's butt.
That really was our crew photo, you know, all in front of this great big elephant that was lying out there in the middle of Paraparam, and it was quite surreal.
It was a very cool day and a good way to see out the Mamakill. People often ask me whether I regret the fact that I never get to do a great amount of the art anymore. And although I do regret it at some level, what you replace with the hands-on opportunities is to watch other people creatively grow with their incredible talent.
Everyone there has been incredibly generous with their knowledge and with their skills and with the techniques, and that's the only way that I've learned. I was incredibly lucky.
To be on what is essentially one big film for so long, and for it to be the kind of project that the entire crew cares about and that everybody intimately is invested in at an emotional level, I think that's very, very rare in the film industry.
It became such a big family, and this common thing that we all shared together was the making of these movies, and I think that was something incredibly special and something that, you know, I'll always cherish.
Probably the best times were always when we're all going for it together. The production office often used to come and tell us to shut up or calm down because we were laughing so much, and Richard used to wander through and say, "Are you guys actually doing any work?"
You wake up, well before the sun, and you create a monster every morning.
You get there with the unit people and the transport people who drive everything in. And everyone goes home and everyone gets wrapped, and you're still there wiping up the bus and shaking a hobbit foot snot out of the feet.
It's hard to explain to somebody just exactly what it was like. It's a very surreal thing, but it's like, it happened. Middle Earth was a real place. We were there.
It is so amazing to experience what it has meant to so many people. What's really neat is that you discover that it's meant as much to these people as it felt to us, being part of it. This 7 years of our lives, this relationship that we've had with Peter Jackson making these films and with the whole crew, have been, without question, the most impacting and wonderful time that we've ever had in our lives.
Well, they are just the most incredible group in the world. We could never have come home. We've just gone and collected these for them, so yay to that.
What are you going to do for the rest of the day?
Well, we're going back to work.